Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our Thursday Bible study period. For the past 6 weeks, we've been looking at the teaching of Jesus. Specifically, we've been looking at the parables of Jesus. And now, for the rest of this quarter, for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be looking at different moments in the life of Jesus. One of the things we wanted to do in this quarter was to give some time and attention to Jesus, to looking at the Savior, to going to the Gospels and learning from his teaching and from his example. So, the first 6 weeks, we looked specifically at some of the teachings of Jesus through the parables, through some of the stories that he taught. Well, we're going to end this quarter by looking at some of the examples we see of Jesus, things that he did, the ways that he interacted with people. We might just call this study the moments in the life of Jesus, moments with the Savior. And today we're going to Mark chapter 5, looking at a specific scene in the life of Jesus. I'll say before we begin, in Matthew chapter 4, it says in verse 24 that the news about him spread throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all who were ill, those suffering with various diseases and pains, demoniacs, epileptics, paralytics, and he healed them. And so the fame of Jesus, as his popularity rose, people sought him out. It seems that the initial reaction of the people was to seek Jesus, not for spiritual needs, but for physical needs. It makes you wonder maybe what it would look like, the crowd of people gathering around Jesus. Maybe kind of a lot like a doctor's office. You have all the sick and all the hurting and all the disease, and they're flocking to Jesus for help. Well, our study today really it begins in Mark chapter 4 in verse 35 when Jesus and his apostles are heading to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and they come across this severe storm. The word where we get our word, the word for storm here is seismos. And so it describes that the boat is filling up with water. And so if fishermen who make their living out on the sea on the water, we're afraid. That tells us about something how severe this storm is. And so the request to Jesus is, do you not care that we are perishing? They were so much afraid of the storm. And then Jesus calms the storm, and their fear is now directed to Jesus. Who is this who can command the waves, who can command the storms? Well, in chapter 5, then, where our study comes from, the chapter begins with a demon-possessed man who in verse 4 through 6, he's described as a menace. He's chained by the people of the town, likely out of fear. And Jesus comes and he agrees to allow the demons, who asks permission of Jesus, to go into the pigs who are nearby. And the pigs run off the cliff. And the people who see this in verse 15 of Mark chapter 5, they're afraid, they're terrified, and they ask Jesus to leave. And so Jesus and his apostles get back into the boat and they head to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And this is where our study begins. Or Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 21, it says, when Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd was gathering around him. So he stayed by the seashore. One of the synagogue's officials named Jairus came up and on seeing him fell at his feet. He implored him earnestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will get well and live. And he went off with him, and a large crowd was following him and pressing in on him. A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and had endured much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse. After hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak, for she thought, if I just touch his garments, I will get well. Immediately the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Immediately Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? His disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing in on you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see the woman who had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her in verse 34, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. While he was still speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue official, saying, your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher anymore? But Jesus, overhearing what was spoken, said to the synagogue official, do not be afraid any longer. Only believe. And he allowed no one to accompany him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the synagogue official, and he saw a commotion, and the people loudly weeping and wailing. And entering in, he said to them, "Why make a commotion and weep? The child has not died, but is asleep." They began laughing at him. But putting them all out, he took along the child's father and mother and his own companions, and entered the room where the child was. Taking the child by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cum," which translated means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl got up and began to walk, for she was 12 years old. And immediately they were completely astounded. And he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this, and that something should be given to her to eat. Oh, it's an amazing story. One of my favorite stories. Jesus comes out of the boat, and in this day, a lot happens. It's a busy day, not unlike most days of Jesus. This day circles around two people who are in great need. There's a man and a woman. At least at face value, do you notice the difference between the man and the woman? There's a man and a woman, right? That's one difference, is that one is a man and one is a woman. And that meant a lot in that culture about who gets the importance, who gets the priority. One of them, we have the name. The man is named Jairus. The woman, we don't really know much about her. We don't know her name. The man was a synagogue official. He's really important. He's really high up. The woman had spent all that she had. She's absolutely broke. The man comes and he bows before Jesus. He asks and he pleads. The woman comes from behind and just touches, just comes and takes secretly. Now you notice in both in verse 23 and verse 28. Notice it again. Verse 23, that the synagogue official implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her so that she will get well, and live." Notice that phrase, "she will get well and live." And you notice in verse 28, the woman, she thought to herself, "If I just touch his garment, I will get well." Both of them, you notice that word will. If you come and touch my daughter, she will get well. And then the woman, if I just touch Jesus, I will get better. They both had incredible faith. They both believed that Jesus was able to solve their problems, to heal the illness, to bring about whatever it was that they needed to solve the issue at hand. So Jesus comes ashore as we work through the scene here. And there's a large crowd that's gathering, and up comes the synagogue official, and the amazing thing is that he bows before Jesus. The big deal is that here's a Jew, a man of prominence, and he's bowing before Jesus. It's obvious he didn't have a shy faith in who Jesus was. He didn't care about the consequences of what the Pharisees would have thought about this, because at this time, if you follow Jesus, if you believe in Jesus, very likely you could be put out of the synagogue. You could be seen as an outcast by the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin. And so, but he didn't care. He didn't care because there's something he cared more about than his standing before the Pharisees and the Jewish elite. And that was his daughter, the condition of his daughter. He had a little girl who was 12 years old. She was 12 and she was sick and she was to the point of death. And so he comes begging for Jesus to heal her. And there's something here that all of us who are parents can relate with. If we have a young child who is ill, there's nothing we wouldn't do for them to get better. We would empty our bank accounts. We would fly across the country, across the world, if it meant seeking their well-being. And so here, this man obviously has heard about Jesus. Jairus has heard about Jesus and his reputation, and he has enough faith to believe Jesus can help his daughter get well. So they come and they're on the way. Jesus agrees, and for a moment, this man has hope. Jesus has agreed to come, and so let's go. Let's go back to the house so you can save my daughter. So on the way they're going, and they enter into this big crowd. And from Jairus' perspective, you're in a hurry. You got a time clock. You got to get back so you can heal my daughter. And this is where we find the woman. Now, what do we know about the woman is down in verse 25, that she has suffered from a hemorrhage for 12 years. Isn't that fascinating? She suffered for 12 years, the same age as the daughter. She has suffered as long as this girl has been alive. Her illness is described here as a hemorrhage, as an issue of blood. And so obviously she would have hurt physically, weak, would have looked pale, would have felt weak, would have been in pain. Verse 26 says that she had endured much at the hand of doctors, and you can only imagine what that would have meant, realizing the ancient practices at that time. What did they do to try and heal her? What experimental treatments did they try on this woman to try and get her better? And it wasn't only that it hurt her physically, it hurt her economically, because she emptied everything that she had. She ran out of money because she poured it all into these doctors, and none of it came out. None of it brought about healing. And so she's out of answers, she's out of money, she's out of hope, and really this would have hurt her spiritually. Because she had an issue of blood, the flowing of blood, which meant that she was perpetually unclean, unable to come into the temple, unable to come and to associate with people. She'd be careful who she touched, who she bumped into, because if some of her bodily fluid, if her blood got on someone else, they too would be unclean. And so here's a woman who has lived in isolation, both from the house of worship and from people, and she's lived this way for over a decade, for 12 years. And so here's a woman who socially, economically, physically, spiritually has been suffering for a long time. She's out of answers and she's out of hope. But she's heard about Jesus in verse 27. She too has heard about Jesus. She has this idea that if she can just touch Jesus, that she will be made well. Now you wonder where she would have gotten this from. Where would she have gotten this idea that even just touching him, not even asking, just touching Jesus would have gotten well? Well, back in chapter 3, verses 9 and 10, that Jesus had healed many, those who were sick, just by his touch. And chapter 6 and verse 56. Chapter 6 and verse 56, it says that whenever he entered villages or cities or countryside, they were laying their sick on the marketplaces and imploring him that they might just touch the fringes of his cloak. And as many touched it, were being cured. And so it was a common thought that even just the touch of Jesus was enough to cure you. And maybe that was all that she heard, all that she needed to hear, to believe that just the touch of Jesus, just the touching this miraculous man, this incredible man, would bring about healing. So she comes and she reaches and she touches, and immediately she's healed. Jesus did in a second what doctors could not do for over a decade. And Jesus turns and asks the question, who touched my garment? Who touched my garment? Now, the apostles kind of look at this dumbfoundedly, because it's the crowds are pressing in, they're all together, and they're thinking, what do you mean, who touched you? Everyone touched you. He touched you, she touched you. We've been touched by a lot of people, but Jesus is making a point. He's proving the point. There's a big difference between bumping into Jesus and the touch of faith. Undoubtedly, there were other sick people in that crowd. Undoubtedly, there were other sick people, injured people who had bumped into Jesus, but there's a difference between bumping into the Savior and the touch of faith. Someone reaching out and touching, believing that if I touch him, because of who he is, he will take away my sickness and my illness. Believing that he is the Son of God who has the power to heal, and I'm reaching out in faith, trusting that because of who he is, I will come away healed. That's the difference. That's the main difference. And so he asks, who touched me? And you notice her response in verse 31 through 33 is that she's afraid. And the reason she may be afraid is that I'm caught. I thought I'd get in and I'd grab it, and I'd grab the miracle and just sneak away and go my way. But I'm caught. I came from behind, I took without asking, and now I'm going to be punished. Is he going to take it back? Is he going to take it away? Will he give me something worse? It's amazing then is that in Mark chapter 5 verse 33, she comes forward, she falls down, and it says that she told him the whole truth. Luke's account tells us in Luke 8:47 and 48 that he allows her to tell her whole story. And he listens. And can you imagine? She starts to pour out the whole story, all the years, all the illness, all the ways it's afflicted her and bothered her, all the ways that she tried to find answers, and none of it happened. Now here's the thing. He's listening to her whole story. He's letting her open up her heart and pour out what's going on. Don't forget how this scene began back in verse 21. We're on a timetable here. Jairus is trying to get Jesus back to his house to heal his daughter, and now Jesus is stopping over this nobody, this no-name woman, and he's letting her pour on about her whole story. And again, there's a lesson here. I might have told her to just wait. I might have just said, you need to wait your turn because there's something a lot more important. We're on a timetable and my daughter comes first. My daughter must be healed, but not Jesus. Jesus sees this woman as just important as the synagogue official's daughter. And so even though she wasn't a woman of prominence or position, even though we don't know her name, even though she might not have had a lot of money economically, even though societally she might not have been of great value because she was just an average woman, in the eyes of Jesus, she was very important. She was worth waiting on. She was worth listening to. She was worth the time and the attention of the Savior. And so he listens. He listens to her story, and you notice his response. Jairus is worried about his daughter and the healing of his daughter. And Jesus says out loud for all to hear in verse 34, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. It wasn't magical clothes that healed this woman. It was faith. It was faith in the Son of God, and it was Jesus who healed her. And this woman came presenting an amazing example, an amazing lesson for all those there. She had enough faith to come to Jesus, to come to the source of healing, and she came away restored. Well, while they were speaking, some men came and from the house of the synagogue official, and essentially they said, why trouble the teacher anymore? Why trouble Jesus? It's too late. It's too late. She's dead. It's over. You took too long. Essentially what you see is that they put a ceiling on God. Had Jesus come while she was alive, then he could have saved her, but now it's too late. She's dead. Hope is over. It's all lost. Sometimes we do this. Sometimes we tend to put a ceiling on God. God can do some things, and God can do things that are in our scope of understanding and imagination. But there's some things that maybe are just too big, too great, too far gone, too lost for God. This illness is too great. It's become too serious. This prodigal is too far gone. His mind is so made up that maybe God just, it's outside of it. No one can do anything at this point. It's just too far gone. Why trouble God? Why trouble the teacher? And we forget what Paul said in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20, that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly beyond all that we ask or think. Far beyond our imagination. And so don't put a ceiling on God. Don't say it's too late for God. It's too far gone for God. It's outside of God's ability. No, not with our God. Because you notice what Jesus says. What Jesus says. They say, don't trouble the teacher. It's too late. Verse 35. Jesus then speaks to Jairus and he says, do not be afraid any longer. Only believe. Only believe. The voice of Satan through peers and those in the world says, it's too late. Why are you putting your trust in God? Why are you putting your trust in someone like Jesus? It's too late. It's too far gone. There's nothing that they could even do. That's the voice of Satan and the voice of doubt. And we can listen to that voice. And we can give in, throw in the towel in fear. Or you can listen to the voice of Jesus who says, don't be afraid. Believe. And so they go to the house. They go to the house, and Peter and James and John, the inner circle, are allowed to go inside. And inside they find this great commotion. And understandably, children are not supposed to die before their parents. No parent should ever have to bury a child. Well, in the first century, you had professional mourners. They were hired to go to a house and to make a great commotion. And that's what you have here. So you have these professional mourners who are there carrying on and crying and shouting and screaming. And Jesus comes in and he says, there's no need for this. There's no need for this great commotion. He says that she's not dead. She's just asleep. Well, they mock him. They mock Jesus. And you notice what he does. He kicks them out. He removes them. And that's what we have to do. When there are some who mock at statements of faith and promise and victory given by Jesus, when there are some who say, what are you trying to prove? Who do you think you're trying to be? Um, why do you hang on to that hope? Who really believes in Jesus anymore? Remove the voices of doubt. Don't let them in your heart. They keep you from having a life of faith. They keep you from hanging on to your hope. And maybe people who are trying to tear you down is people who can't stand it when you were doing well. And maybe certain books that are mocking and ridiculing faith. Don't give that an inch. I mean, think about what Jesus said to Peter in Matthew chapter 16 when Jesus is teaching that he was going to die and rise again. Peter tells him, that's not going to happen. May it never be, Lord. And Jesus responds by telling him, get behind me, Satan. Get behind me, Satan. Jesus' death on the cross was so central to God's plan that any opposition of it was to accomplish the work of Satan. And that may be the case for many today, that Satan may be using people in our lives to keep us from living those lives of courageous faith, from stepping forward when others would be afraid. Don't do that. Who do you think you're trying to kid? You're putting your faith in the God you can't see. You just need to get in line. You just need to toe the line, and you need to put those voices that say you're not good, that this is worthless, that you'll never change, that there's no hope for you. You need to put those voices aside, to not listen to the seeds and the thoughts of Satan, and to put your trust in God. Jesus removed those voices, those mourners, out of the house. Those who were mocking his statement that she was just asleep. He removed them. And then he goes over to her and he takes the little girl by the hand. And he tells her to rise. Little girl, I say to you to get up. Now this is profound. This is profound. This has happened over and over again. That in the situation with the widow from the city of Nain, he goes to her young son who dies, a young man, and he tells her son to rise. With Lazarus in the grave in John chapter 11, that Jesus tells Lazarus from the grave to come forth. This is really a profound statement, because Jesus here, not only do we see from chapter 5 of the book of Mark that Jesus has the authority to cast out demons, Jesus has the authority over souls. He speaks, and even the dead hear his voice. Even the dead obey. He speaks, and beyond the realm of the living, this little girl listens and comes back. Jesus has the authority over souls, and Jesus has the authority over death. And so he tells her to rise, and she hears him from wherever her soul is kept, from Hades, from the presence of God, wherever she is. She hears and comes back and is alive. And the first thing that she sees is the Savior who is holding her hands. And obviously the response from those in the roomers is that they're completely astounded. And he tells them that they need to keep this to themselves. Isn't it a beautiful scene? An amazing section here. Well, there's a couple of things we can learn from this. Number one is that sometimes we think in life that our needs are more important than others. You know, my problem is bigger than your problem. Let me deal with my issue before we deal with yours. In today's time, the woman with the issue of blood wouldn't be given the precedence at a hospital. We're going to deal with the little daughter first, because she's dying. You've suffered with this for many years. We're going to focus on the daughter and not you. You know, the reality is all of us have different needs. I need not ever think that my needs are more important than yours, than someone else's. We all have needs, and we all are broken. We all need Jesus. And what we need is a greater humility to recognize that, and to offer to carry one another's burdens, to bear one another's burdens, rather than trying to place my needs and my issues before another's. You know, another lesson from this section is that Jesus replaces fear with faith. Well, Jairus and the woman had situations which caused great fear. Losing a loved one is a reason to be afraid. Facing personal illness and death and wondering if you're ever going to get better, that's what causes a lot of fear. But both of them had seen something in Jesus which caused them to come, which caused them to beg, which caused them to reach out in faith. What you see is that fear is replaced with hope. And this happened again with Jesus when he saw Jesus heal the woman with the issue of blood. The fear was replaced with faith. Look at the evidence. Look what Jesus just did. And so this is all of us. Maybe like Jairus, I'm afraid to lose something that's important to me. I don't want to lose a job. I don't want to lose a loved one. Or maybe like the woman, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that I'm never going to improve. Maybe spiritually, I'm afraid that I'm never going to get out of this rut, of this sin, of this temptation that I'm in. Or maybe it is an illness that I've had for many years, and I wonder, will I ever get better? Will this ever improve? Maybe it's a situation in life. Will my marriage ever improve? Will things with my children ever improve? And we're wondering. We've been in this hardship for so long, and we wonder, is there any way out? Well, look to the example of the woman, because she looked for hope in all the wrong places. She tried to pour all that she had into the best wisdom of the day, the doctors at that time, and she came up empty and broke. Nothing was fixed, nothing was solved. And that can be us today. Maybe we've tried every option. We poured ourselves into our jobs, our school, into things, into relationships, maybe trying to find meaning or fulfillment, trying to appease a guilty conscience, and none of it works. And none of it will. None of it will take away the guilt of the past. None of it will provide lasting meaning or purpose. No, the answer is Jesus. It's always coming to Jesus, because when you look at verse 35, of our context here, when it says in verse 35, your daughter has died, why trouble the teacher anymore? Jesus gave a promise to this man. I'm coming to your house. I'm coming to your house to heal your daughter. Trust in the promise of Jesus. If Jesus said he's coming, he's coming. If Jesus says he'll heal, he'll heal. And so when Jesus says in John 14, do not let your hearts be troubled, believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. And if it were not so, I would tell you. For I go and prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I'll come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. I will come. I will receive you, that where I am, you will be also. That's a promise. It's a promise. Our hope is not in man. Our hope is not in the best thinking of man. Our hope is not in our riches or in our strength or in our jobs. Our hope is in God and in Jesus. Ground yourself in the promises of Jesus, of what he has said. And the thing that's most impressive in this section, the thing that impresses Jesus the most in this section, is faith. The faith that these people had. They had enough faith to come, to ask, to reach, and to beg. And so let me ask you, do you find yourself full of fear today? Do you find yourself troubled over life situations? Have you thought about going to where the answer lies? Have you thought about putting your faith in the one who can do all things, who promises hope, who promises victory, who promises assurance? Don't live in fear. Live in faith and walk by faith. Reach out in faith to Jesus. Put your hope in him. Give your life to him. And watch how your fears melt away with a confident faith in the Savior. Thank you so much for walking through this chapter with me. I hope it's been a blessing to you. We're going to have a few other lessons as we wrap up this quarter, looking at great moments in the life of Jesus. I look forward to you coming back and studying with us again. Have a wonderful day. Take care.